On the morning of the 19th of September, 1356, the most powerful king in Christendom rode out to destroy an army of thieves. That, at least, is how the court of France saw it. King John II, John le Bon, John the Good, commanded the largest and proudest host his kingdom could assemble, a wall of steel built around the greatest names of French nobility, and somewhere ahead of him, trapped against the woods and vineyards south of Poitiers, was a small English army that did not want to fight at all. It was exhausted. It was outnumbered roughly 2 to 1. It was short of food and water, weighed down with the plunder of an entire summer of raiding, and its commander, a 26-year-old prince, had spent the previous day trying to negotiate his way out of the trap, offering to hand back everything he had taken. The King of France refused. He wanted more than the loot. He wanted the prince himself, kneeling as his prisoner. He believed, with total conviction, that by sunset the humiliation of Crécy would finally be avenged. He was right that the day would be remembered for a humiliation. He was catastrophically wrong about whose, because by sunset the flower of French chivalry would once again lie broken in front of an English line. The sacred battle banner of France would be lying in the mud beside the body of the most famous knight in Europe. And the King of France himself, bleeding from a wound to the face, would be surrendering his glove to an exiled knight in English service, while enemy soldiers physically fought each other for the right to claim him. 10 years earlier, England had taken France's army. Now England was about to take France's king. To understand how a king could ride into such a disaster, you have to understand the 10 years of poison that came before it. Crécy, in 1346, had not merely been a defeat. It had been a demonstration, performed in front of all of Europe, that the mounted noblemen, the entire foundation of French military identity, could be slaughtered at a distance by common archers with yew bows. The French crown had spent a decade digesting that horror, and by 1356 it believed it had found the answer. The knights would no longer charge blindly on horseback into the arrow storm. They would dismount and advance on foot in dense armored masses, exactly as the English themselves fought. And the longbow, so the theory went, would lose its great advantage, because the arrows that so easily maddened and killed horses were far less deadly against a slow, deliberate wall of plate and mail. France, in other words, had studied England. France had adapted. And that is precisely what makes Poitiers so devastating a story, because Poitiers was not the defeat of a foolish enemy. It was the defeat of an enemy that had learnt its lesson, prepared its revenge, chosen its moment, and outnumbered its opponent, and it still was not enough. The English army that summer was not an army of conquest. It was a raiding column, perhaps 6,000 men, English and Gascon, under Edward of Woodstock, Prince of Wales, the man history would remember as the Black Prince. In August, he had ridden north out of Bordeaux on a chevauchée, a great mounted raid designed to do one thing: burn the wealth of France until the King of France came out to fight, or stood exposed as a ruler who could not protect his own people. For weeks, the column cut a corridor of smoke through the heart of the kingdom, town after town, granary after granary, and the strategy worked almost too well. King John gathered his host, sent away thousands of slower infantry so that his elite could move faster, and force-marched to cut the raiders off. In mid-September, near Poitiers, the French army did what French armies had failed to do for a decade. It caught the English. The hunters and the hunted had changed places, and every man in the prince's column knew it. They were hundreds of miles inside hostile country, hungry, thirsty, carrying their loot like an anchor, and the road home to Gascony was now blocked by the King of France and the finest army of the age. What followed on Sunday the 18th of September was one of the most extraordinary negotiations of the Middle Ages. A cardinal, Talleyrand de Périgord rode between the two camps for an entire day, desperate to prevent Christian bloodshed. And the terms the Black Prince offered reveal exactly how desperate his position was. He offered to return the towns and castles he had taken. He offered to release his prisoners without ransom. He offered, by some accounts, to swear not to take up arms against France for years. It was as close to surrender as a Prince of England could come while still sitting on a horse. And King John, looking across at his trapped, outnumbered enemy, rejected all of it. His counter-demand was simple. The Prince of Wales and 100 of his best knights must give themselves up as prisoners, unconditionally. For the son of the King of England, that was not peace, that was ruin and shame. The talks collapsed, and in the English camp that night there was no illusion left. They could not retreat, because the French cavalry would fall on their column the moment it began to move. They could not wait, because they were already starving. They would have to stand and fight an army twice their size, or be destroyed trying to run. The prince put his men behind the one ally he had left, the land itself. Hedges, vineyards, sunken lanes and a marsh guarded his front, with woodland at his back. And along a long hedge, pierced by a single narrow gap, he set his archers and waited. The next morning, the French plan began exactly as designed, and for a moment it looked like the lesson of Crécy would pay its dividend. The attack opened with the one mounted element the French had deliberately kept, a picked force of some 300 of the best armored knights in the kingdom, under the Marshals of France, Audrehem and Clermont. Their task was surgical: to ride down the English archers at the hedge before the main assaults went in, to cut the bow out of the battle at the very start. The knights came on down the narrow lanes, banners streaming, the elite of the elite, and the English arrows came out to meet them. And here the French discovered the first horror of the day. The archers had answered adaptation with adaptation. Where the arrows glanced from the knight's frontal plate, the bowmen shifted, some wading out into the marsh on the flank, and shot instead at the horses, into their unarmored flanks and hindquarters. The result was not a battle. It was a churning, screaming chaos of maddened animals in a confined space, riders crushed under their own mounts, the finest cavalry in France dying in a lane too narrow to turn around in. Marshal Clermont was killed. Marshal Audrehem was captured. The surgical strike meant to remove the longbow from the field had instead been devoured by it in full view of the waiting French army. Then came the true test, the moment the new French doctrine either worked or died. The first great division of dismounted men-at-arms, thousands strong, advancing on foot under the king's own son, the Dauphin Charles. And the terrible truth is that the doctrine very nearly worked. The armored mass absorbed the arrow storm and reached the hedge, and for something like 2 hours there was grinding, close quarters slaughter along the English line, the hardest fighting of the entire day. English and Gascon men-at-arms locked against French steel, with no room to maneuver and no reserve to spare. The English line bent, it did not break. And at last, the Dauphin's battered division pulled back to reform, mauled but not destroyed, having proven that Frenchmen on foot could reach and rock the English line. What happened next, no doctrine could excuse, and no Frenchman who saw it ever forgot it. The second French division, thousands of fresh men under the Duke of Orleans, the king's own brother, watched the Dauphin's bloodied troops streaming back, and instead of advancing, it turned and left the field. An entire division of the French army, unbeaten, unbloodied, barely engaged, simply rode away, taking with it the numerical advantage that was supposed to make this day a certainty. The English, watching from behind their hedge, could hardly believe what they were seeing. Fear had entered the French army, The same creeping fear born 10 years earlier at Crécy, and it was hollowing the host out from within before the decisive blow had even been struck. That blow now approached, and it was aimed by the King of France in person. John advanced with the final and largest division, the oriflamme, the sacred crimson war-banner of France, carried before him in the hands of Geoffroi de Charny, the man contemporaries called the perfect knight, the author of the very book of chivalry. This was the moment of greatest danger. Fresh thousands against an English line that was wounded, exhausted, and by now critically short of arrows, archers scavenging shafts from the bodies in front of them. Every rule of war said the prince should brace behind his hedge and pray. Instead, he did the one thing no one in the French host imagined possible. He attacked. The Black Prince ordered his weary men back onto their horses and led them out from behind the hedge, straight into the advancing royal division, and as the two masses collided, he unleashed the stroke he had prepared in secret. A small mounted force under the Gascon lord, known as the Captal de Buc, sent looping unseen around the flank, burst out of the ground behind the French army and struck it in the back, banners flying, at the very moment its front was fighting for its life. The effect on the French ranks was instant and absolute. Men who believed they were grinding out victory suddenly heard English war cries behind them, and the great royal division, the last hope of France, convulsed and shattered. Geoffroi de Charny died where the fighting was thickest, the oriflamme of France still gripped in his hands as he fell. At the center of the collapse, a shrinking ring of steel closed around the king himself. John fought on foot with a battle axe, and beside him, refusing to leave, stood his youngest son, Philip, 14 years old, crying out warnings above the din. "Father, guard your right. Father, guard your left." Words a horrified France would repeat for generations. But courage could not stop the arithmetic. The ring collapsed, and the King of France found himself surrounded not by princes worthy of his surrender, but by a scrum of soldiers screaming at him to yield, each man grasping for the richest ransom in the world. The man who finally received the king's glove was Denis de Morbecque, an exiled French knight fighting in English service, and even after the surrender, the mob nearly tore the royal prisoner apart in the struggle to claim him, until English commanders forced their way in and escorted John to the Prince of Wales. That evening, the Black Prince served the captured King of France at dinner with his own hands, waited on him like a squire, and praised his valor above all men who had fought that day. It was exquisite chivalry, and it was also exquisite theater, because every courteous gesture said the same unbearable thing. The King of France was now a possession of England. The battle had lasted a single morning. The consequences lasted a generation. France was left a kingdom without a king, its government paralyzed, its nobility discredited by the flight at Orleans' order, its countryside sliding within 2 years into revolt and chaos. The ransom eventually fixed for John's freedom was 3 million gold crowns, a sum so vast it beggared the realm, alongside a treaty that signed away vast territories of France. And John himself gave the story its astonishing final act. Released on terms, he returned voluntarily to captivity in London when those terms were broken, saying that if good faith were banished from the rest of the earth, it should still be found in the hearts of kings. And he died there, a prisoner of England to the end. Step back, and the full weight of the decade comes into focus. In 1346, England had shattered France's army at Crécy and captured the King of Scotland at Neville's Cross. 10 years later, outnumbered, starving and cornered, England had taken the King of France himself. Twice in 10 years, a reigning king had marched against England certain of victory. Twice, that king had ended his march in the Tower of London. Europe was learning a lesson it would spend centuries relearning. An English army is never more dangerous than on the day it has no way out.